Hey everybody, Aaron Herman of the Open Scroll here. It's good to be back with you, and Shabbat Shalom. Today is the first day of the 10th month on the Lord's calendar, and I'm here with Bob Schlenker.
Hey, greetings and Shabbat Shalom. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off in John 17:1 through 18:9. And we're going to talk about what it is and what it means, and we're going to be reflecting on when exactly it was that this happened and what it means for anniversaries of the event as a prophecy. So when I compared chapter 17 with 18 verses 1 through 9, we already talked about 17:1 and how it's matched up with John 18:1. We also spent a bit of time talking about how, in the purple here, you see the son of destruction and the evil one, how this is obviously Judas, how this one's obviously not. But here's Judas named. But these three identities are one in the lawless one, the Antichrist beast. So in the further comparison, we have three different colored sections here in verse 9 of chapter 18. And I'm going to expand on that. And we're going to find these in chapter 17. And obviously, we know that this in 18:1 is a reference to John 17, because those are the words that he had spoken in that prayer. And we know that this is also a reference to chapter 17, and we've done the matchups to the local perspective here in 18 and also in 17. But to further cement that these two are one, we're going to find to fulfill the word that he had spoken up here in verse 12 of 17, that the scripture might be fulfilled. And of course, these words that he spoke have become scripture, and Jesus knew all things that were happening to him there and all things about the future that the Father revealed. So the next phrase here, of those whom you gave me. And where is that? Well, that's a large subject of chapter 17. In this prayer, he says, whom you have given me. Whom you have given me in verse 9. Whom you have given me. Or whom you gave me in verse 6, and also verse 6, you gave them to me. And here in verse 2, whom you have given him, and he's referring to himself. In the last expression, I have lost not one, this is really the primary expression. And where do we find that? Right up here in verse 12, I have guarded them, and not one of them has been lost except the son of destruction, that the scripture might be fulfilled. And so we see a direct correspondence with verse 1 to verse 1, chapter 17 to 18, and also verse 12 here to 19 down below, or 9 down below. So with that correspondence noted, the next thing I want to focus on here has to do with how Jesus knows all that would happen to him, right? And right here in verse 4, then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him. So he does these things knowing all. And it's an interesting contrast to those who have come for him, because they don't even know the present. They can't recognize the present because they can't remember the past. Verse 4, then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, whom do you seek? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. So he asked them again, whom do you seek? Have they remembered the past? Do they have a grip on the present? Well, they say, Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah, Jesus knew that they wouldn't know, that they wouldn't remember. That it would be like the memory wipe of the Men in Black with the little clicky thingy, right? Zap, and that part of their memory has just been removed. And we understand why that is. It's a mystery with no answer unless you understand about the reset of time, and then it makes perfect sense. So instead of saying, why are you asking me that again? They can't ask because they don't remember. So Jesus knows everything that would happen to them. What do they know? Nothing. And this is quite an advantage for Jesus, I would say, right? Quite a disadvantage for them. And at the reset of time, some are going to know, those who are aligned with Jesus. And those who are not, very specifically, are not going to remember. And they will have quite a disadvantage there. So in the binding between chapter 18 and chapter 17, you have to realize that the kind of provision that it takes for those to be aligned with Jesus to be able to know what's going on, even about the future. This is due to the preparation that comes as a result of the prayer in chapter 17. That's a huge deal. We need this, people. We need this now. This is our provision. And so that's why we continue to focus our attention on John 17 and 18, 1-9. And we are going to be moving on because there's a lot more to get from chapter 18 and how it aligns with chapter 19. But there's some more things we want to cover here. And also, we want to talk about some things that we consider as signs, because this is life and this is how the Lord works with us. The Bible is not just a brittle old book filled with words that only means something to the scholarly. This is the book of life, and it's for our life. So in John 18, we're going to consider how that in the narrative here, the Passover is looming. There was a preparation for it back in John 13. We're going to see in John 18 and 19, we're going to see the trial and the crucifixion, the death and the burial. And this is Yeshua as the Passover Lamb, the Paschal Lamb. Even Jesus, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. So this Passover is not the only Passover that's in the Bible as being very significant. In fact, at its institution, it was hugely significant. And every Passover since has been a memorial of this event. And I refer to Exodus 12. And we see the Passover Lamb here as a title, Feast of Unleavened Bread. And there are commands about remembering this and celebrating it as a permanent ordinance throughout your generations, as a permanent ordinance. Why? Well, we know historically that this Passover Lamb is Yeshua, and he was sacrificed even as the lamb was sacrificed in time, like on an anniversary of the day. These anniversary things are to help us understand how God works, why he sets things up as a memorial, because they're prophecies that are often fulfilled again and again in different ways. And so it must be, because there's many things on the Lord's calendar that are stacked up and they're cryptic. The Lord doesn't go through and sort it all out for us immediately at the first presentation of it. Things are kept kind of on the down low, just as people need to know, that's when they know. So it's definitely a memorial, but it was also definitely a prophecy about the Lord's own being slain as a sacrifice and how that would buy freedom for his people, because that's what this did. That was part of that whole deliverance from Egypt situation. And that situation is not yet completed. We are still in the midst. So with this Passover, when it was instituted, we see here in what I've got highlighted in yellow, in verse 2, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Well, yeah. So why does he repeat that so obviously? This month shall be the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Isn't that kind of redundant? Absolutely. Well, what is the point of this repetition? Well, pay attention. Give it some special attention. This is the first thing as the Lord begins to reveal what it is that they're supposed to do for this Passover. Verse 3, tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. Oh, what difference does it make? 9th, 10th? Well, it matters. The Lord is very particular about his times and about what's being done. And when you talk about the 10th day of the month, if you look in Joshua, right here, you'll see this is chapter 4 of Joshua, when they're crossing over the Jordan. Once they've crossed over, which was a miraculous situation that compares as a bookend to what we're reading in Exodus 12 and what you see in Exodus 13, 14, bookends. And here in verse 19, I read, now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. That's an anniversary. Why does it bother to tell us when this is going on? And why does it tell us later in chapter 5 about how they celebrated the Passover once they went over into Gilgal and they were circumcised, which they hadn't been. So all the children who had not been in Egypt as adults, they got circumcised. And there's a lot of connections to be made there. And you'll find that in Joshua 3 in particular, as you reflect on their preparation and their crossing over the Jordan, you'll see some common elements in John chapter 17 and 18, which Aaron and I noted is the Lord was opening these things up to us probably a couple weeks ago now. So here in Exodus, the beginning of months, okay, that's the first thing that he talks about. And so we see that this situation is kind of special when you consider what we're talking about right now in the subject of John 18, because we're talking about the reset of time. And when time is reset, there's going to be a new timeline spawned in a sense. So what this means is it's going to be a beginning of months. Once again, the same month, the first month of the year, it's going to be a new declaration, a new beginning of time. Time is going to be reset. And it's not just a calendar reset like, oh, we're just going to call this now the first month. If that's there and it means nothing, then we can just ignore it. But if that's there, right there, and give an emphasis for a reason, that here as we reflect on these things and look at the anniversaries, we have to make note of that. And this really resonates with the reset of time. Aaron?
As you were talking about that, the Lord was bringing to mind, you were looking at the symmetry here. And he established the beginning of months right as he was about to save the nation of Israel from a doomed situation. And we're talking about symmetry. So we've talked about this timeline being doomed. So to have something like a major time reset mentioned like that. In this timeline where we're doomed into the reset back into the biblically correct prophetic timeline, it's symmetrical. That's how the Lord does things. So it just makes sense that there would be a one in the past and one now in our present time that matches up with it.
Right. And when you look at the wandering in the wilderness period before they made entrance into the promised land, they were brought across in a miracle crossing of the Sea of Reeds. And that is upheld as a standard of God's power to this day. But that happened at Passover time, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And at that crossing over water on dry land, this is a time thing. And then they went into a kind of special pocket universe kind of a situation in the wandering. Nothing wore out. Everything stayed as it was kind of new. And they ate miracle food that was provided for them on a daily basis. And these kinds of things, when you put them all together, they have a great significance. Put that together with the crossing over on the 10th day of the month under Joshua. That was a miraculous crossing again over water as time. 12 stones, the time number, were taken out of the riverbed from around the feet of the priests as they stood carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which really is a mobile center of time as we understand it. And so the waters of the Jordan as the river of time were parted. 12 stones, the time number came out, 12 went back in. We've spent a lot of time addressing that situation, and there's keystone patterns involved in that. And what we find is very consistently these patterns continue to weave through the scriptures. And so when we find them here in John 18, where there's a reset of time, and it's companioned very specifically with the section up here in John 17 that has to do with the weaving together of chiastic patterns that each has its own keystone pattern. Well, we just can't ignore that. And when we see the same themes of John 13 woven together here, you gotta do the math. And it's not simple math like 1 + 1, but it's definitely doable. It's not linear algebra. It's not brain surgery. These things, if we give our attention to it, the Lord can open up to us what is meant. And this is what we want. Not all of us need to be able to go in and do all the technical stuff. We just need, when the truth is in our face, we need to be able to recognize it and walk in it, accept it. So that's our challenge, not to get bogged down with extraneous, miscellaneous, superfluous tidbits of nonsensical information that never amounts to anything. We're to look into the details and the depth of things and find the truth that's meant for us, that's been hidden there for us. So we've had a lot of study, and we've kind of boiled it down. I'm going to ask Aaron to talk about some of the words used here, and then we're going to talk about some of the other scriptural connections. And we're going to talk about drew back and fell to the ground. And this is really a very central event, something that Aaron and I, over many years now, we've looked at that and known there's like some kind of thing going on there that holds our attention, such that there's like a promise associated with it. Because when the Lord shines a light on something, it's not for no reason. So this has really stood out. So let's talk about that one. And Aaron, what have you got for us?
Yeah, looking at that here in John 18:6, drew back and fell to the ground. Seemingly simple sentence, but when we unpack the words individually, it really takes us from the superficial kind of, well, they just took a couple steps back and fell to the ground, to really support the esoteric interpretation of the time reset. And starting with the word for drew back, which is Strong's G565, ap erkamai. And in John 18:6, it's alpathon, drew back. So it's seemingly simple. Well, they drew back. But what we really have there in Bible Hub, it gives us a definition where when there's specific mention made of a returning or going back, like going back to where somebody started from, where this is the case, it's made evident by grammatical and language connections, and they specifically list John 18:6 as one of those. So drawing back, they're not just simply taking a couple steps back, they're returning back to where they started from. So that's the first word in that sentence, drew, the aperkamai, where they're starting to go backwards. And the word for back is Strong's G3694, apisso, which is behind, after, back, and it's related to not just space, but also time. And it's connected there by a preposition, ace. So the sentence there actually reads, ace ta apizzo. So drew towards the back. And the preposition ace could actually mean in, to, or into. And apisso is not just space, but also can be related to time. So drawing back into the time where they started to before is a very, relevant and appropriate esoteric interpretation of these words. And with the apisso, which is really interesting, this gold standard of kind of a Greek lexicon, it's called a Greek English lexicon of the New Testament in early Christian writings. And it's also referred to as the BDAG, which stands for Bauer, Danker, Art, and Gingrich, the men responsible for it. It's really the gold standard of lexicons for Greek. And it has something interesting listed for the word apisso there. It lists that as draw back, turn around. And it designates it as a marker of position in back of something. And it relates it to Philippians 3:13, which is very interesting. It says the imagery Paul uses in the foot race, an imagery of a foot race, the part of a course already covered. So all the ground that's been covered, going back to where they started from in the beginning. So just like reset of time, esoteric interpretation. So that is pretty exciting. And the other one that's listed there in that verse is also Luke 9:62, where Jesus says, no one who puts his hand to the plow and then looks back is fit for the kingdom of God, with the interpretation there looking back to where someone started from. So the pretty consistent interpretation here is back to the beginning, where they started from. And so moving on to the next word, which is seemingly pretty simple, but fell, which is epison, which is Strong's G4098 from the word pipto. And this is a really interesting word in this context. It's not just fall, but a move with relative rapidity in a downward direction. Persons who fall to the ground fall down violently. So we're not just looking at someone just kind of stumbling and oops, just tripped and fell to the ground. We're talking about a violent, rapid downward fall, a descent. Keep that word descent in mind, because that's an important one.
Thanks, Aaron. Yep, we're going to spend a little time here, and I wanted to make a reference to Luke chapter 10, which is pretty popular. In Luke 10, verse 18, and he said to them, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. That word fall is the same word that's in John 18:6. Fell to the ground. Slightly different form, but it's the same word. And that's significant because Judas was among them. And when they fell back, Judas is a type of Satan's man. Satan had entered into Judas, remember? At the Last Supper, John 13. So that's relevant. And it's also relevant that his disciples are given authority in his name, because that's part of the deal that's required in the esoteric level there in John 18, the reset of time. Now, there's another correspondence in Revelation chapter 12. And There's a war in heaven. I'll start reading from verse 7. Actually, Aaron, why don't you read verse 7 through 13 for us?
And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, and he who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life, even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child.
And a lot of points could be made about that, and I don't believe there's a direct correspondence at every level with John 18. They drew back and fell to the ground. But again, this is Judas. This is the devil's man. Satan had entered into him. And so when we look here at what's going on, after time is reset, this is all going to be happening. And you see I've highlighted in blue all the thrown down. And in verse 12, a time number, for this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea. And in the book of Revelation, it really needs to be understood how that what happens in heaven happens on earth. What happens on earth is a reflection of what's happening in heaven. They're not unsynchronized. We hear the occultists say, as above, so below, talking about the Hermetic maxim. And this is the basis of their magical principles. And they're binding things in the heavens all the time. But this is something that's given to Christians to do, binding in heaven. And how do we do that? We're here in the earth. Well, we're also in the heavens. We're not just flesh beings. When you become a Christian, you are in heaven. You are a heavenly creation. So when you see these things happening in John, and you think, well, this is happening on the earth in the temporal realm, raise your vision. There is something going on in the heavenlies as well that's synchronized, not disconnected. So when you look at the things that are going on here, I don't think we're going to need to make a direct correspondence, but some of this I believe will happen at the reset of time and also at the revealing of the lawless one when it's finally accomplished. And it says here, because the devil has come down to you, right, continuing on, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. Does he have great wrath now in this moment in time, in this season? No. Does he know that he has only a short time yet? No. Something's going to happen. Then he's going to know. So it's been withheld from him. And because of the kind of missions or activity that we recognize as being associated with these situations of the different levels of fulfillment, this is when all that's going to take place, and there's going to be war in heaven and war on earth. But before I go on to the next point about the Greek language use here, I want to just kind of remind you that this reset of time is woven together with Judas's betrayal. And I believe this has everything to do with what's going on also in 2 Thessalonians 2 with what's happening with the man of lawlessness being revealed. And when we we read about this part here, this is a view of the heavens, the heavenly situation. And it will manifest on earth, but it will primarily, in the language of the description of what is the apostasy, it's actually a standing away from. And so we've spent a little bit of time talking about that, but it's important to notice the supernatural context here, and that this has to do with the activity of Satan and these signs and wonders. And this is supernatural. And how do we know? Well, we see here that this particular son of destruction, which we read about in John 17, takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Now, how is that going to be convincing? This is not just in the temporal realm and in some physical establishment of a third temple on earth. This is literally the temple of God. And who is the church? Who is Israel? God and his people. And the temple of God is actually in the heavenlies, where we are with him. And so he's going to display himself as being God. How so? Is God just manifest strictly in the flesh? No. This is supernatural. And so we're talking about spiritual events in the heavenlies that are synchronized and manifesting on the earth. And this is really somehow central, because here's Judas betraying him, who's standing with them in the midst of this reset of time scenario. And again, on the 13th day of the first month. So, Aaron said, we're in the first day of the 10th month right now. And there may be 12 months this year. We don't really know. We have to wait and see. There may be a 13th month. And how will we know? Well, the time will come when there will be a search for barley and a determination of how ripe it is, whether it will be ripe enough to offer up on the appointed day during the feast of Hag Hamatzah, Feast of Unleavened Bread. Well, too soon to say. Will there be 12, 13? We'll see. But when the first month does arrive, after the barley has been determined as being ripe enough, and the new moon will be witnessed, the count will begin, and 13 days will pass. And at that point, it will be an anniversary of this day that we're reading about here. And all the events from John 13 on through to John 18 will be a memorial and a prophecy possibly fulfilled. And we think, we would not bet against, let's just put it that way, time being reset on the 13th day of the first month. We've had enough indications through signs and opening up of scriptures to say that it seems pretty likely from where we stand today. And so we're going to continue on the basis of it being likely. And as time goes on, based upon what the Lord indicated to me last month, I anticipate, or actually a couple months ago now, I anticipate that we will know more, that the Lord will give a word and confirm whether it is what we think it is or whether it's something else. So with regard to this detail of drawing back and falling to the ground, we've shown you the passage from Luke 10, from Revelation 12, and there's more of interest to be considered here, and it kind of resonates with the supernatural context here that we're talking about, the higher dimensional heavenly realm and what's transpiring there, and then manifest on earth, and even with respect to the actual resetting of time. So I want to thank Cindy for passing on her thoughts about this word, and I want to show you that word for ground is this word right here. And you can see on this side of the page on the Bible Hub, chamai, it says that it's used twice, once in John 9:6 and once in John 18:6. And so that's our passage of interest, where he fell to the ground, Judas and those who were with him. Now, as you look to John 9:6, this is where there was a healing. Jesus spat on the ground and made clay, put it on the man's eyes, and he was healed. So there's a miracle associated with that would have been impossible. This is the man born blind, right? In John 9:6. That was a big sign, a major sign. Now, as I scroll down, here's Thayer's Greek lexicon and the description there, and here's Strong's exhaustive concordance and the description here. It's an adverb, perhaps from the base of chasma, through the idea of a fissure in the soil, earthward, that is prostrate on to the ground. And it says, see Greek chasma. Now, Aaron, you showed me that there's another resource that's perhaps even more authoritative alongside Strong's exhaustive concordance. Could you tell me about that?
Yes, the reference in question was the Greek English lexicon of the New Testament that we saw earlier. And it has a very, very interesting definition for that Greek word chasma. The definition they have, located on the ground or on the ground, but where it gets interesting is where it says pertaining to location on the ground as objective of movement or to the ground, specific of John 18:6. And then where it gets very, very interesting for us, where it says, referring to the unbridgeable space between Abraham and the place of torture, literally a yawning, which could rightly be interpreted as a time and space barrier, which is certainly fitting in the context of which we're looking at all this.
Right. I'm going to click on the word, and here it is in the Englishman's Concordance, showing us that it's only in Luke 16:26. It's only got this one single occurrence. And so it's everything that Aaron just told you about from the BDAG. And what we have here is descriptive, and it's really most helpful just to look at it right here. And so in verse 26, this is the record of the rich man and Lazarus. And of course, there is a gulf there between two people. Verse 26 reads, and besides all this, between us and you, there is a great chasm fixed. This is the word again that's related to the word ground over here, and fell to the ground. And so there's a connection there here. And it's a time-space barrier, a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. It's an uncrossable barrier, and it's clearly supernatural. And so when we're talking about heavenly matters and extra-dimensional realms, heavenly realms, that's clearly implicated there. So the language, as we've been talking about it, and as Aaron has shown you, going through the words for drew back and fell, with that perspective on the word ground, we understand that there really is something significant. And it had to be some kind of a spiritual situation that was going on at the time to make all them fall down on the ground. And it may have been a gravitational wave, which is related to a time wave. And, you know, some of you have been tracking with these kinds of things and the technical nature of how things work. And that's probably what it was, a gravitational time wave that kind of rolled back. And this is actually very relevant to the reset of time. And so at the reset of time, if it does come to pass on the 13th day of the first month, it's not going to be just randomly out of the blue with no heads up given. We've got a heads up here. and we should be prepared in advance. And if the day comes and goes, well, so be it. We'll hope to be here, able to do whatever needs to be done after that. We've certainly found ourselves in this season, quite surprisingly. We would not have bet on our being here now, but yet here we are. So we only know what the Lord reveals to us in the ways that he reveals them, and he's still kind of keeping things close to the vest, keeping his poker face, because things only need to be revealed in their time, not before, certainly not after. So we're just trying to keep pace with what he's doing, not trying to run on ahead. There is no running on ahead. We're just completely blind and completely ignorant on our own. We got nothing. We're not smart enough. Nobody's smart enough. When the Lord's got a treasure and he's locked it up in its chest, you're not going to get at it until he himself opens it to you. And so, our kind of high-octane speculation about this is more of an educated guess, I think. At this point, we've got a pretty fair idea from the kind of things that the Lord has revealed that, yeah, there's a likelihood here, like I was saying at the beginning. So I want to make a couple of more points about the dimensional realm that's in view here. I have a note that the comment on 18:1 B to E is relevant. So that's this bar right here. Jesus went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, which we have learned to recognize as a reference to the river of time. A crossing over is thus a transiting into a heavenly domain that's outside our space and time. Jesus and his disciples crossed over together to where there was a garden, which they entered. We might see this garden relative to the Garden of Eden, which is a dimensionally guarded place, Genesis 3:24. A heaven or compartmentalized heavenly realm that might be thought of as a pocket universe in today's sci-fi lingo. This insight came to me as I was contemplating the meaning of the structural link to John 17:1, which begins with the identical expression you see highlighted in yellow. Compare the action of the scenes. He lifted up his eyes to heaven, right up here. When Jesus had spoken these words, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you." He goes on and he talks about eternal life, soaked in time language, right? Lifts up his eyes to heaven. Let's raise our vision here. So it compares to how he went across the brook Kidron and entered the garden, crossing over the river of time, entering a different dimensional realm. And is this really implicated here, or are we just kind of reaching and imagining? Well, we've looked at the context here, the esoteric context. We're talking about the heavenly realm. I showed you from 2 Thessalonians 2 that we're talking about the heavenly realm there. These are supernatural matters that are the subject, because that's where our focus needs to be. So here, I'm going to continue reading. If we limit our thinking to the physical and temporal realm, we will only picture him in the posture of looking up. But as he looked up, he began to address his Father who is in heaven. While he is obviously in the garden with his disciples on the Mount of Olives, he discloses the truth that he is also in another place where his disciples are not. Why do I say that? Well, here's John 17:24. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am. Why would Jesus ask for them to be with him where he is when they are together already in the garden in the earthly realm? Why, indeed, there is another realm implied in another people at another time, or rather at other times, plural. And I have plugged in a fair amount of commentary here and up in chapter 17. And really, it's incomplete. All the thoughts that we've been talking about in the video are not in there. And certainly with enough time and with the Lord's provision, I could make that happen. But the Lord hasn't given the provision for me to make that happen. He's given me the provision to be here with Aaron and to share these things in a video and to give you the opportunity and the invitation to come and look. You know, we're not holding this in reserve. We're not teasing you with this saying, we're not going to give it to you. It's right there on the openscroll.com, right in the interactive page. There's a link. So go take advantage of it, explore it. There's another comparison I want to make that will shed some light on this structure and this weaving together around this section where we see what we believe is the reset of time, this exact repetition. And there's a similar pivot in 1 Kings 19, which we have also spent a little bit of time talking about, made a video about it. And this structure here, I'm going to read from verse 9, and then I'm going to read, actually, Aaron, why don't you read from 9 to 14 here for us?
There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains, and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, for they seek my life to take it away."
Thank you, Aaron. So just like in John 17, here we find Jesus having a conversation. Some things happen, and then some strange things happen, very strange. And then the conversation repeats exactly, right? And now here in 1 Kings 19, likewise, what we find here is there's a conversation. The word of the Lord comes to Elijah, and there's a conversation, and some weird things happen. And then the conversation repeats exactly, and there's no recollection of it. Elijah didn't say, well, didn't I just answer that question? Didn't you just ask me that? No. He just carries on. The conversation continues, and what do we make of that? Well, you know what we made of that. We believe that that is the reset of time. And one remembers, one doesn't. And, there's not a complete character matchup because Elijah isn't Judas. And Elijah didn't fall to the ground. They're not there to arrest God. But this is Mount Horeb, and this is a very significant thing. In John 17, they're on the Mount of Olives in a special place. And so this in 1 Kings 19, this is where Moses had been, and he saw the burning bush, and he had a conversation with God. It says, "I am," right? And on the same place, on the same Mount Horeb. And what did we point out from John chapter 18? Well, what does Jesus say? He says, I am. So there's a very direct connection between what was going on there in the garden, the scene of the arrest, and what happened on Mount Horeb with Moses, and also here. No coincidence that there's a complete repetition of this conversation in these two places. And so what I believe has to be compared here for more insight is what's intervening. Here, Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them, and there's that posture of standing, and then there's emotion. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. So there's a returning back, falling to the ground, Judas and those who are with him. And so when we compare what's in between, which is this section that I've got highlighted here, it's very interesting. And in 1 Kings 19, what we pointed out is that very directly, this is a keystone pattern. As we see, God is not in three things that are fairly dramatic. And then a fourth thing, a low whisper, that's the fourth thing. And we can assume that that's what God's in. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. So here's some motion, relocation, and that corresponds to this up here. There he came to a cave and lodged in it, and then he's told, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And so this is so many comparisons, and we can't dismiss that. Aaron?
Yeah, and to that, I find it interesting there in verse 13 we're looking at, when Elijah hears the low whisper of the Lord, that's what precipitates him wrapping his face in his cloak and moving, taking action, going out and standing at the entrance of the cave. And then when we look at John 18:6, it's when the Lord says, when Jesus said to them, I am he, that matches up to them drawing back and falling to the ground, the sound of his voice precipitating that movement and action. I find that a pretty interesting connection there between those two.
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up. And these comparisons are not for nothing. And the structure work that we've done, putting it on exhibit, is something that when you make a comparison, you might want to put them on two of your screens if you've got two screens to look at, or on two different devices if you've got two different devices to look at. And consider these comparisons. And when we talk about this being the reset of time, and here it is framed by this very dramatic scenario, which is a keystone pattern. And when we make a point about how this reset of time down in chapter 18 really compares with what we have up here in the central 2 units of the 6+6 chiasm that is chapter 17, and how this is very particularly got a keystone as part of the binding. We're not making stuff up. We're not just guessing. This is not our whimsy. This is not just, a rumor that we heard somewhere that this is going on. We're putting it on exhibit for you, so you can kind of clear the cobwebs out, have some coffee or whatever, get yourself focused, and see that what we're showing you is legit. And with regard to the timing is certainly a factor in this account in 1 Kings 19. Does it say explicitly that what's happening here is on the 13th day of the first month? No. Was it? Maybe. I don't know. But I do know that these are modeling the same things, because we can make the comparisons and they're legitimate. And I want to point out that the Judas Antichrist revealing of the lawless one scenario is here. And the reason why I say that has to do with understanding about these events, that the Lord is not in The Lord is not in. These are dramatic events. And with Judas, with respect to the revealing of the lawless one, all these supernatural manifestations, all these, things that are manifest on the earth. And this is substantial, this great and strong wind when the Lord passed by, right? Broken pieces of rocks before the Lord. Wow, that might get your attention. Is the Lord in that? Well, when the lawless one is revealed, people are going to assume, yes, absolutely. And they'll be deceived. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind and earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. What is the Lord not in? He's not in the counterfeit, the lawless one. He's not in the counterfeit, the one who claims to be Christ, the one who sets himself up in the temple of God, which would be, shall we talk about Mount Horeb again? We should. There's that. So after the earthquake of fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. All these dramatic things, and the Lord is not in them. The Antichrist will have quite a show, and the Lord's not in it. And again, here we go, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, that's his mantle, his anointing, and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. So there's a lot more going on there that we don't understand, but we understand enough to say this means something. It has to do with the reset of time. It has to do with the revealing of the lawless one. It has to do with the revelation, not only of the counterfeit, primarily, it has to do with the revelation of the genuine through the counterfeit. You'll see the counterfeit taking up almost all of everybody's view. And just to one side of that, the genuine will be manifest. One gets your attention and the other, and reveals the identity. The fraud is appointed, as a baptism is appointed to reveal. It reveals identity. And this revelation of identity is what it's about in 2 Thessalonians 2. This revelation of identity is what's going on here. And this revelation of identity is what's going on here. Whom do you seek? Jesus of Nazareth. I am he. Here's Judas who betrayed him. And what is a betrayal? Well, when Judas went up and kissed him, he's saying, yep, this is the one. He's the one. Here's Jesus. And here's Jesus revealing himself really through the agency of the lawless one. And while we pointed to 2015 as the year when that's actually going to happen, we did not realize that the 13th day of the first month also has, it seems, everything to do with the reset of time. You see it here in John 17 and 18 as they're bound together. You see it in 1 Kings 19, which is very clearly bound together, very specially. There's like 6 other keystone patterns in that chapter. We've also, you can see this video here, 6 keystones, and I think we added one to make 7. So when you, again, look at the whole context, look at the big picture, you'll see that there's something going on with the 13th day of the first month and a connection with these events with respect to the reset of time as it's related to the revealing of the lawless one. And if you want to continue to get more insight, I encourage you to reflect on that previous video that we made where we introduced John 18. And I'm going to point you to one other place for more insight. And we're not going to get into it, but we also have a lot to talk about the signs that relate very specifically to the 13th day of the first month, those that we received mostly in 2015. Very dramatic signs, and they speak very loudly to us. Aaron has recorded a lot of this in his logging, And a lot of it's also recorded directly on the blog. And we're going to be referring to that. So in addition to these other sections that I've pointed you to, I'll refer again to Joshua 3, and you can see what kind of connections there are. And of course, this happened on the 10th day, not the first day that they crossed over, but there is a definite correspondence there. And with regard to the reset of time, we see it here when they're crossing over and the 12 stones come out and go back in. And the memorial is set up in Gilgal. And there's a context of conflict and war in so many of these passages that needs to be highlighted. This is our claim to the promised land. This is our preparation for a claim to the promised land, which is different from that which is has been and will be claimed by Israel. But it's related to it, and it has to do with warfare. And the reset of time really is a strategy. There's a strategic maneuver that takes place, and the lawless one will be denied accomplishing what he otherwise would have. It'll be cut off at the reset of time, I believe. And then when it finally does happen in 2015, what he would have hoped to accomplish will be denied him. And I believe that's really when the fullness of the rest of what needs to be fulfilled in Revelation 12 will be manifest. And so much of Revelation 13 will also be manifest there. The time number, yes, and the number for the mastery of time. Aaron?
Yeah, something the Lord keeps bringing to mind there in 2 Thessalonians 2, it tells us that he takes his seat in the temple of God. Not that he's going to try to take his seat or fail to take the seat. He will takes his seat in the temple of God. And, begs the question, well, why would the sovereign God allow that to happen? And if you ask yourself that question in the context of what it has to say in verse 9 there, about receiving the love of the truth as to be saved, and how that relates to everything you've covered in John 17 and what Jesus had to say about protecting his people from the evil one. And it's an important question to ask and to get a strong hold of as we go further in the days ahead, because there's some important answers to that important to get a hold of.
Thanks, Aaron. And the work that Yeshua says he's doing in chapter 17, guarding, keeping, not taking them out of the world, but keeping them from the evil one, the sanctification in the truth, is consecrating himself so that they also may be sanctified in the truth. You need this. I need this. We need this. God is going to have a people. He's going to have a people that he's preparing now. And maybe you're one of them. Maybe you don't yet know. Maybe you're not one of them. But the Lord has appointed a people to be sanctified in truth. And that's essential. And it's a small number of people who are going to serve a purpose. And they're going to walk in Jesus's footsteps, really. And just kind of on that line, when Jesus walked on water, when you look at water as time, think about it. And what did Peter do? Yeah. So there will be some who walk in his footsteps with him, not independent of him. Remember, Peter fell, took his eyes off the Lord. So this is where you need to get a hold of everything you can in learning to look at the Lord, focus on him, despite the storms that's going on all around you, despite the affliction that you're suffering, the persecution that you're suffering. The Lord's got provision, all we need, and we need to look to him to receive it. Thanks for watching, everybody. God bless you. Bye-bye.